Hey everyone, and welcome to my first deck tech of Opus 17, Rebellion's Call. And today I am presenting my favorite deck so far, probably my favorite deck of the Opus, and that is a Category 6 deck with these lovely Final Fantasy 6 characters. This is the one that I have tested the most by far, when I have the most extensive practice with, and I've made a lot of adjustments to it here and there. I'm going to go over this primary list first. I have an alternate version I will show you near the end, but I just wanted to delve into it and kind of talk about the different cards and everything about that I really appreciate. So, if you are unfamiliar to Category 6 Fire Ice, this is a pretty well-established archetype, all the way probably back since Opus 4, I'd imagine. Lock being the premier card of that when Lock enters the field, as long as you control 2 or more Category 6 characters other than Lock, your opponent discards a card, and then Lock will rip a card out of your opponent's hand every time he deals them a point of damage. Tried and true card. Definitely fell off a bit once cards got stronger and people drew more. And that's still prevalent, but there are a few things about Lock that I really enjoy. In particular, Amaterasu. As you can see, we're running 3 of these. Just one of the best summons of the game. Lock is one of those cards that I don't necessarily mind if it gets Amaterasu. Now, of course, you'd prefer if it didn't, because you want to be able to sit there and attack over and over again and try to get more cards out of their hand. But the interesting thing about discard is that, the point of a discard card is that you want to lower their hand size. So if they are pitching two cards from hand to cast Amaterasu for a total of 3, Lock just said, hey, on entry, Lock kills itself, but make your opponent discard 3 cards. That's fantastic. The only time it's kind of okay for them is if they can dole 3 backups and pay for it just like that, and then they're only losing a single card from hand, and then you lose your Lock. But other than that, if they're paying more than 1 card from hand to get rid of the Lock, I'm fine with that. That's what the card wants to do anyway. So Lock is kind of old tech. Let's focus on some of the new stuff to start. And in particular, Edgar is the big star. So when Edgar enters the field, you get 2 Category 6 forwards other than Edgar back from your break zone to your hand. Honestly, I think it should have been character, but whatever. And then he has an action ability that costs nothing. You choose a 6 forward of cost 3 or more you control. Next time you use its special ability, you can do it without paying the S cost. However, you can only do this on your turn, which is very unfortunate. It really should have been on your opponent's turn as well, given all the limitations of these cards in this deck. But nonetheless, we're going to do what we can with it. So Edgar is a great little recursion tool, which is nice because this deck didn't really have a ton of recursion. You really had to rely on backup Setzer for that. But in particular, Sabin, his brother, is his best ally because Sabin, 1, gets cheaper for every 6 character you control, but then he has 2 special abilities that just cost S, so if Edgar is on the field, you can use them for free. Or a cannon, which is just so weird to say. I'm so used to it being or a bolt because I played the English 3 version on the Super Nintendo, but just hit something for 8,000, very nice. And then Chakra, you can activate every forward other than Sabin, and they gain 2,000 power to the end of the turn. That one was particularly relevant in a ice matchup where someone kept trying to hit my dull forwards with something like Zalira, and Sabin could just, Chakra on the stack, get him back up. For the most part, you're probably going to be using Aura Bolt the most. So, with this deck, this is kind of one of your new pieces. There are a lot of different angles I like that you can approach in this list. So, you probably always want to go first because the sooner you can get Lock out, the better. And this deck has a very interesting timing. Lock in particular has a very interesting timing. You don't want to play Lock too late because I've done that before where they get plenty of time to set up. They've got 5 cards in hand. Okay, sure, I'll pitch a card for Lock. I don't care. That's not a big deal. The sooner you can get down Lock, the better. Now, do you do it turn 2? I don't know. It depends on what backups you get down. If you can get down, like, let's say Setzer on turn 1, and hopefully he'll get you back a 6 forward on his entry. And then you can also pair that with Interceptor or the Moogle or some other 2 costs. So now you're set up on next turn, especially if you have the Gestelian Empire Sid. You can dole 1 backup, get the Sid out, go get the Lock, and now play the Lock out immediately. Now, some people would say, well, actually, you should just wait to play the Lock off of 3 the next turn. And you can. Again, it's a very much a judgment call of you have to look at their hand size. If they played out for their backups, they're on 1 in hand, it's probably worth it to get Lock out. Just that way, 1, it's not going to get Amaterasu. 2, now you're forcing them into top deck mode. That's great. Lock also does benefit from Edgar, in that Edgar can make the Mirage Dive completely free. So you can always guarantee that Lock gets through from one of the attacks. Very nice. These are the two specials you will be taking advantage of, Mirage Dive and Sabin's abilities. Unfortunately, so I am running Shadow, but unfortunately Shadow does not work with Edgar because you cannot use Edgar on your opponent's turn, which would have been amazing. If you could just dull a fire back up and then Shadow Fang someone anytime you take damage, oh, it would have been so good. That was a huge missed opportunity for them to not do that. Nonetheless, one of the reasons I'm playing this Shadow, and you feel free, again, I'm going to show you another version that actually doesn't have this card because this card has the quote-unquote curse mechanic of Reveal 5. Shadow enters the field, you reveal top 5 cards of your deck, you add a backup among them to your hand, and then you get to play a backup of cost 2 or less from your hand onto the field. When it goes off, it's amazing, especially if you can get down Interceptor off of it. Shadow will immediately get haste and 1,000 power, and he can run right in. When it doesn't go off, it doesn't feel so good. So, personally for me, I will not play down Shadow unless I have a 2-cost backup in hand. So, when I bring Shadow out to the field, I'll have Cyan in hand or Hurdy or Interceptor. And that way, even if you don't hit one of the backups off the reveal, you still get to play one out, so Shadow does still get additional value. Unless you're absolutely desperate and you don't have another play, I would not put Shadow out unless you have a guaranteed backup in hand you can slam down. Otherwise, you're really playing the slots then and hoping you hit something. Nonetheless, what I like about Shadow is I don't feel like I've ever really bricked in this deck because there's a lot of early options. As a player, I always like to see my backups early, so I'm happy to set any of these cards up. But let's say I only see one backup, and then I draw into okay, well now Shadow is a way to potentially ramp out into more backups, which I really like. Or, let's say I see the lock. The lock then, okay, well if I've got just enough 6 characters, I can have lock go in there as well. Last Swell also kind of fixes this, especially if you end up going second. Last Swell is a great turn 1 play that you freeze whatever backup or card they put out on their first turn, and now Last Swell is threatening, hey, if you don't get rid of me or put a forward out to block me, I'm just going to also start at hitting your hand every turn. Charlotte can follow up with an additional Last Swell, Dull Freeze, and she's also just a magnet, which is great, helps protect the rest of your board. So that's what I've really enjoyed about this deck, is I feel like there's a lot of really good opening plays. It's one of the few decks I feel like I haven't bricked on just because, again, there's so many different options, which is awesome. So let's talk about some of the other cards in here. Cyan is just in here because he's a 6 character. On occasion, the 1,000 Brave can be really nice if you happen to see him later. But if you see him early, you're just putting him out there because he's a cheap backup that is a 6 character, so he builds towards Lock's count. The Moogle, I like, as Steve D mentioned in one of his videos, he only really plays these color-fixing Moogles if he feels like the colors are really skewed towards one side over the other. And as you can see here on the wheel, we're relatively even. 25 ice, 27 fire. We've got a couple dual elements in here. So you could take this out for something else, but I like seeing, again, to me it helps give you consistency. If early game, if I see this class 2nd Moogle as my only backup, hey, I'm color fixed now for the whole game. I personally appreciate that. If you want to go another direction, absolutely. Interceptor you have to have 3 of. Not only is it great for Shadow, but it threatens the potential that, hey, I can haste out any of my 6 forwards. The only time I've hasted, usually you're almost always going to haste Lock because having Lock come in, take a card, immediately go in, hit them, and take another card is great. Obviously, you have to have an open line to do that. Other than that, I usually will only haste a 6 forward if it's going to get me lethal. It determines the game. Otherwise, but it's a nice threat. It's something your opponent always has to respect is they can send any of these cards out if they want. Kuchaspel is here just for those matchups where you run into a Rydia or a Garland or something that Sabin isn't going to be able to blow away. Kate Sith is just a nice, helps fill out our ice colors. And Kate Sith is kind of a funny card because it does feel a little swingy in the sense that I've played it before, my opponent has nothing worth taking in hand, and you would actually be a detriment to yourself if you just removed something anyway and let them draw a card. Don't let them get 1 card deeper to their deck. However, it's optional. You get to scout their hand. You aren't forced to take a card out of it, which is nice. And sometimes you can see a huge threat. I think one game I did it, my opponent was playing Monks, and they had the Sophie in hand. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's gone. And so turn 1, I've already gotten rid of the Sophie threat, which is great. Red 13, I have actually liked the more I've used it. It's, again, just cheap fire CP early, but it's really potent against things like Glaciella. So my opponent had a Glaciella the other day. I put Red 13 onto the field. They didn't have a Lucas. This is just a 7K Glaciella. And what you do is you, similar to the Lena Crystal card, you stack both effects. So whichever one you want to do first. It doesn't really matter. I guess it depends on the CP in hand. But so you say, okay, I'll stack the potential discard, and then on top of that, I'll stack the pay fire. And so my opponent was like, oh, well, he wanted to respond with a summon to save it, but there's no way he comes out on top on that because I pay the fire, say, hit her for 7. He says, okay, well, now I'm going to cast a Titan to, like, buffer by 5,000. I was like, all right, well, now I move on to the second effect. Now I will discard the card, hit it for another 7. You don't have to do the discard or the additional pay until the effect goes to resolve. So I really like the way he's worked out. Hurdy is just an excellent generic, just great ice backup. It's an early ice CP. The Dull Freeze I have used countless times. I couldn't even tell you. The Flash is... I don't know if I've ever used it in this deck in particular, and it's because there's not really anything I want to cheat in on my opponent's turn. Again, if Edgar could be used on your opponent's turn, Edgar would be an amazing card to bring in, especially when they try to go for your break zone. Here's X-Death, here's Mist Dragon. It would be great to be like, all right, Hurdy, flash in Edgar, save those cards that you were going to remove. Now I immediately give Sabin his effect, boom, blast whatever it is. But beyond that, it's just, I mean, what else are you going to... I mean, I guess you could flash in a Celtius. I don't know. I've never used it in this deck. I don't think it's there for that, but I'm more than happy to have it just for the Dull Freeze threat. Speaking of Hurdy, I will mention... this is the alternate version. I'll go on to that more. Mont Blanc. So originally, I ran Mont Blanc with Hurdy. I ran the full package. And... it's just, again, I said I was trying to go for consistency, right? Well, Mont Blanc is both the definition of consistency and inconsistency. If you see them in the right order, you see Mont Blanc, you play it on curve for 3, you Dola back up, pitch 2, pay Mont Blanc, then you pay 2 ice from your hand, you search the Hurdy out, put to the field. It is great. It is a truly great combo. Not having to pitch the Hurdy from hand, pulling it right from the deck, all the next ones you can do whatever you with. It's so good. However, if you see the Hurdy first, which I often did, the Mont Blanc is a dead card. You don't want to pay 3 CP for a backup that legit doesn't do anything. The job doesn't help you. The name doesn't help you. People always say that, oh, backups, you don't want to pay backups first. But if I'm paying 3 CP for a Minwoo, that is at least affecting the game from now on about forward power. If I'm playing an Anthem, like Lebro or Duke Larg, from now on, all forwards have an effect. So while it may not have an immediate effect, it eventually does do something. Mont Blanc doesn't do anything. So if you want to do it, if you want to throw this in, by all means, go ahead. It is satisfying when it does line up, but I just found it too inconsistent to see the Mont Blanc first before the Hurdy to make it worthwhile. 3 of Banana Sid, of course, generic 6 searcher, builds up locks count if you want. Setzer. Let's look at the Setzer, shall we? Setzer has a lot of great cards. He really does. I'm still very fond of this old Amano one that doubles up as a Gestalian Empire Sid. A lot of times back in the day, people would off of one backup play the Setzer, go get the Sid, Banana Sid, play the Banana Sid, then go search out the lock. It was a great little chain. And then he has an exit effect that, hey, when he dies, he's going to Dull Freeze something. I love this card. I don't think it would even be bad to play this card still. It would be terrible to get an Amaterasu, but you would at least get the exit ability. But this Setzer, 1, is a burst, and we have a pretty low burst count, as you can see from this deck. I think it's only around 7. So this Setzer is a burst, and then he fills out our backup count. The more 6 backups you have, not only does it help lock, it helps Sabin's cost. You want to get Sabin as cheap as possible. So he's just a great, reliable backup. This one, in theory, would be so fun with Edgar, right? You make slots completely free. You dull this once a turn, you reveal the top card, and you're either breaking all dull forwards your opponent controls, or you're activating all your characters, including your backups, and drawing 2 cards. If you want to go in on the slots, by all means, it seems so fun. Again, going for the consistency, this Setzer is more consistent, but this one would be a lot of fun. We do slots. The crystal one sucks. This new one is quite good, too, as far as the on-entry discard, but I don't like Gill Toss either. I don't want Edgar to make this free, to then pay an ice, to remove a card from the top of my deck that may not even kill the thing I want it to. And then it's removing a card. All the cards in here are valuable. There's no cards I want to just throw away. So I'm sticking with the backup Setzer. If you want to go on the slots or this one, by all means, go nuts. But that's the one that I like the most. All right, rounding out some of our other cards. One copy of Vayne. Him and Celtius are both mainly in here for the color fixing. It is very nice to, on a single card, be able to pitch for the ice or the fire CP, which can be very relevant in this deck. However, Celtius is also a good thing to play later in the game. You've got a lot of targets you'd be happy to hit off of this, Edgar probably being one of the predominant ones, but even Celeste isn't bad, Terra's quite good. Sabin's like, it's nice that he comes right to the field, but again, technically he can become so cheap that it kind of feels like an overpay. Again, it's another Reveal 5 mechanic, so Celtius is only a one-of because I just don't find it reliable. And if you draw this card early, it doesn't do anything because you just don't have the bodies to get rid of yet. So, just a one-of. Vayne is actually quite potent if he can get up there. If you can get enough fire, that makes him a 10k. And then ice, he's discarding on attack 2, really hurting your opponent's hand. But more or less, he's in here just for the color fixing. Terra is a 6 character, helps Sabin, helps Locke. Lets us recur our summons, Amaterasu being the most important one. Summons, I'll mention briefly too. The summons are the most flexible spot in here. I think you absolutely have to have 3 Amaterasu. I just don't think there's anything better you could put in for that. Zalira, Brynhildr, you could do a couple things here. The new Shiva, the 2-cost one, really isn't terrible. Helps prevent a damage-based board wipe against you, and can deal with a really bad 2-cost if they're playing Edge or, Zidane, I don't know, something that's really bothering you. Chivalry also isn't bad either. As you can see, I actually have it in this version of the deck. Chivalry is quite nice with something like Sabin. You can cast Chivalry on Sabin, then you can Aura Bolt somebody, and now not only are you going to blast it away, they have to discard as well. Again, I think it might be a little more viable if you could get the free Aura Bolt on your opponent's turn, but that's something else you could consider. Brynhildr is, so sometimes I have tried this new Bahamut, and it's in this version of the deck. And this Bahamut is truly great. It's especially good against something like X-Death, which when it gets to 10,000, you need that 1,000 extra power to finish it off. It's also a nice combination with Sabin, that Sabin can hit something for 8, then you can have Bahamut finish it off with 2 or 1, and then put all the damage on something else. So if you want to swap Brynhildr for Bahamut, absolutely feel free to. The only reason I haven't is because I cannot count the amount of times Brynhildr on a burst has actually saved me. Where again, they'll have a Lady Lilith or an Edge or a Viera Finennis, some 5-cost card that the Brynhildr comes out on burst, ba-ding, and not only blows that target away, draws me a card. If you don't want to rely on that, absolutely I would swap it in for Bahamut. And Zalira. Sometimes it's amazing, sometimes it's just not great. You definitely want to board clear in this. It is very easy to fall behind on damage, especially depending on the matchup you're in. Susano, again, has saved me. I couldn't even tell you how many countless times, so I would highly recommend having 2 of them. It's a great way to stabilize the game. Celeste, haven't talked about her yet. She's, of course, a 6 character. And if you can get to the turns where Celeste and Locke can party attack, those 2 can win the game by themselves. I locked out an opponent entirely who was on 5 backups, but I would party attack, I got his hand down, so he's basically top decking every turn, and he was playing Water Lightning, but he had 2 Lightning backups, 3 Water, so I'd party attack Celeste and Locke. You freeze both their Lightning backups, he's now completely locked out, and then I'm ripping the last card out of his hand every time. It was just brutal. And then Celeste, if any 6 character parties, as long as she sees a 6 forward party, you can also, instead of freezing 2 characters, you can choose a 6 character in your break zone, add it to your hand. Really good for recycling Sabin specials. Great to, again, people are always going to be gunning for Edgar, so it's good to get back another copy of Edgar. I guess you could even pull a surprise Shadowfang if you really needed to, but her effects are absolutely good. Again, kind of a consistency thing too. If I'm unlucky enough to not see any of the backups, to not see the Shad, not see any of my quote-unquote consistency pieces, but I have Celeste, I'll just put Celeste out turn 1. Either choose to make them discard, go search Locke, and then now you're ready to potentially start party attacking and freezing some of their forwards out, especially if you can do like a Celeste and a Laswell. As far as getting the Locke or the discard, you'll just have to use your best judgment on that. Sometimes making them discard, like I did a turn 1 Celeste, made them discard, they're starting their hand with turn 1 less, that ended up being really potent. You have to use your best judgment on that, but very, very good card, and the more party attacks you can get off, the better. Last but certainly not least, I want to talk about this Amaro card. So there's a new Amaro we got that I tried extensively, and I really, really don't like this card. When I first read it, it was through a translation, and I thought it said that your opponent discarded when you entered the field. And I thought, well, that's fantastic, and then he can make him discard again. However, he actually makes you discard if you control 4 or less 6 characters, which can be very difficult to hit, especially if you see this guy early. You know, if you look at some of these, sometimes I actually don't see the 6 backups. I don't see Interceptor and Sid and Setzer. So I've had games where I see, Kate Sith, and then Red 13, and then the Moogle. So I don't even have any 6 backups. And then that Amaro just felt, I don't want to pay 4 for this card, nor do I want to dump my hand to make it where he's, well, he only costs 2 because I didn't have to discard. If he was 3 or less, it would be a lot easier to get around that because it'd be similar to Lux. But 4 can be very difficult. What that means is if you could have the Sid, the Setzer, the Interceptor, play Amaro, you still have to discard a card. That's way too much for me. Then my issue with this card was in my experience, it never did anything. It never changed the game. Because it's just, at least in this package, it's just weird. So it's forced to attack once per turn. Now, yes, it has this handy action ability that you can dull it, put it in the break zone, your opponent discards 2 cards, right? Discard 2 is awesome. However, if you attack, you can't use that because he's now dull, and other than a random Cyan, there's no way to give, consistent Brave in this deck. And then if you dull and break him put him in the break zone, yeah, you can rip 2 cards out of their hand, but now you don't have this body, and the problem was it kind of had anti-synergy with Lock, in the sense that if this game is going well, if you are winning, if the game is going the way you wanted to, your opponent already doesn't have cards in hand. Locke and Celeste and whoever lasts well will have pulled their hand to empty. So I only ever had them at 1 or 0 cards in hand when I even would have considered using Amaro's effect. So I don't want to do that to just pull 1 card out or maybe have nothing. So it just never changed the game. I would often see him early. He would make me discard. I was really let down by this card. I don't think it works very well at all. Maybe as a potential comeback mechanic if they have a huge hand, but even then, it's not like you can make them discard immediately. You still have to wait a whole turn, and people would either just push him out of the way or just get rid of him outright. Really disappointing card. I switched to the 7 cost, and I have been so happy. The first game I put this card in, it won me the game. My opponent had a Fell Thanos on the field. No, that was a different game. First game I put this card in, it won me the game. My opponent had a big threat and another threat that Man in Black was one of them, and I didn't want the Man in Black to keep attacking. Bring in Amaro, send the other threat pack into the bottom of the zone. Now Man in Black's frozen. He's going to be permanently frozen while Amaro's on the field. I absolutely loved it. 7 is a bit of an expensive cost to pay, and I've always felt that. I really wish this card was base 5 and didn't have the whole Mog thing, or maybe even 6, but that being said, it actually changes the field state when he comes in, unlike the other Amaro. I felt like this Amaro just didn't do anything when it came in. It just sat there. And again, if I was already winning, okay, well, now I just have another cheap body to help me win more. And if I wasn't winning, he didn't do anything about that. Whereas the big Amaro did bring me back from dying and saved me in several matches. So, yes, 7 can be a little expensive, but it's been well worth it every time I've played it, especially if there's a forward you can just permanently lock down. I would highly recommend this card over that Amaro. So, this is my version of Category 6. I've really enjoyed playing it. It's been my favorite deck. It's been my go-to. And, I'm kind of nostalgic for it, too. When I get Edgar and Shadow and Locke and Sabinal, and I see all this Amano art just all lined up together, Amaro as well, I just get nostalgic. I'm like, wow, this is the first Final Fantasy game I played. This is so cool. These are all the photos that were in the little handy booklet that came with the game. It's freaking fantastic. However, I do want to show you this other version that, if you don't like the Shadow, the whole point of this is it basically takes out the Shadow. Puts in backup Shadow. Again, another cheap 6 card. On occasion, his action ability could be relevant, but it's kind of hard to get. But this way, you're not going for the Reveal 5 mechanic. This time we squeezed in Leon, again, just another one of our one-off color fixers, and it could be potent if something's out of the way. You just freeze it. You can dull something out of the way to have Locke go in. Orphan, similar, helps you with the discard. pull something out of their hand. I really did like the addition of Jin Biblos in this deck. Biblos will get a lot of triggers off of Lock and Orphan, and then you're just keeping Forge down as well. And Jin, not only is it just a generically good card in its own right, it's quite nice with Sabin that Aura Bolt now shoots for 9,000, so you can basically clear anything out of the field. Jin's also a great partner with Sasano. 10k to the board, the Jin won't get wiped. He's good afterwards. The Bahamut is an excellent summon. Again, you could swap out the Brynhildr in the other deck. And here, the only real differences on the backup line, I took out some of the other ones because of just I don't need Shadow as much anymore. Scholar is nice because you can recur Locke or Lastwell or Charlotte, whatever you need. And then the Emperor Gestalt, I don't know if this card is actually worth playing without another Dark card, so you'll never get his second effect in this. You won't have a Dark Forward to play. However, it's a Cat 6 character, so it feeds into Locke and Sabin's count, and it was kind of nice to have, hey, just break anything I want and develop a backup at the same time. Now, however, the only problem with that is if you have down a bunch of backups that can't be broken, once this card gets in your hand, it's just a dead card in your hand. So if you're worried about that, absolutely swap out the Emperor for something else. But I did like the little bit I've played of him. But again, I don't really play this version. This is just kind of an alternate I came up with. I did test it a few times, and it felt fine. You know, it runs pretty smoothly. It just doesn't have the Shadow. But the Shadow is my preferred version. So I will have the deck list for this in the description below. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy it. If you like what you see, feel free to give me a like and subscribe. And I have a Patreon down below if you're interested. If you don't like what you see, I thank you for watching nonetheless. And until next time, take care.